Welcome everybody, my name is Bartosz. For the last 10 years, I'm working with Dynamics, from Exapta up to Finance and Operations for now. Today, I would love to invite you for Dynamics Finance and Operations Security One-on-One to give you a better vision and explanation of basics of security in finance and operations. It is important to understand that because that gives you licensing cost, that gives you security, and potentially also compliance. Today, I'll walk you through explainer, what is role, so whole structure, what is important to consider when you are building new roles. We're going to talk about where to find entry points. We're going to talk about some standard approaches and databases which are in finance and operations since the beginning. Brief explanation of licensing model component. And finally, what is on the top of the security, how we can do the extras, cherry on the top, and I'll walk you through finance and operations insights, some reportings, standard configuration. So at the end of the session, you're gonna have some great understanding how to configure a role, how to allocate that to the user, and then what to learn more in that pretty complicated world of security. Continuing the roles, and actually everything is the entry point. The entry point for us is the most important aspect. What is the entry point and where to find that? When you think about the structure, you have roles, duties, and privileges. The roles are the biggest groups, and those actual roles you allocate to the end user. The duties and privileges, they are underneath the role. So they are building that bigger group. Duties and privileges, they actually contain entry points. And the entry point is the smallest particle of security which is behind the scenes. The biggest role for them is actually to give you access to the buttons, to the forms, to some fields sometimes, functionalities, batch jobs, so for reports, everything behind, it's the entry point. So at the end of the day, to get access to the sales form, customer creation, new fixed asset, you have to click on the button, and to click on the button, you need to have entry point with specific access, right? Access level. So we have to understand that concept that every entry point builds you the privilege, builds you the duty, and then that sums up to the role. The entry point can be also understood as user interface element. Of course, there are some extras, as mentioned in the beginning, table permissions, field permissions. There are some XDSs, so extend data security. Previously, we had RLSs, record level securities. They are not so important so much unless you use AX3012. And finally, SS report and some services, which are pretty more technical, and we're gonna miss that today on that session. So simply saying, to get access to our user, we can say, I need to allocate to my user one specific role, which will give them access to specific system area. When it comes to finance and operations, whenever you are in your form, in your interface of finance and operations, when you right-click and do the form information, you are able to possess that information, what is behind that button. So in simple way, you could actually browse through the business process, find out what is behind each button on the way, and extract entry points, build the role. It sounds simple, but to do that, you need some extra tools, something which is not yet in the standard, and hopefully in the future, it will be maybe enhanced to make it more straightforward. For now on, anytime you are wondering what is behind the scenes, you can try to use right-click and standard the system will give you that proper information. If you're gonna do install solutions like Executive Automask for security setup or any other available on the market, you're gonna get better understanding because they are more precise and give you much broader context on the entry points. Let's think about the standard. If you're gonna browse through the system, if you're gonna jump into the security configuration, you will notice that there are multiple positions like AR clerk, AP clerk, sales representatives, general ledger manager, so forth. There are hundreds of records on the roles, duties, and privileges. Where do they come from? They come from APQC process classification. That is the database which Microsoft acquired and implemented into finance and operations to build best possible standard for everybody. But as we all know, not everybody will fit into the same size of the trousers. You're gonna have your own specifics, you're gonna have your own specific way how you do the process, you're gonna have your modifications, customized objects. So the standard needs to be modified. And the standard is very often very broad. To give you a good example, if you're gonna use sales representative, and I will allocate sales representative role for my sales rep, as usual, as simple as it sounds, I will give that person around 2,000 buttons, forms, and so forth. But if I'm going to do extraction, understand what actually this person does, they do create customers, offers, pricings, so forth, that will actually sum up to less than 2% of what is in the standard. That impact actually takes you to the mostly expensive licenses, exposes you for security threats, vulnerabilities, versus something which will be easy from the onboarding perspective, because users will not see so many buttons, they will not see so many menu objects, so they can simply focus on their day job, and they will cost less because they probably will become either team member or activity license. So the standard is out of the box available. You can cut some corners, you can cut out some elements out of the standard and build your roles on the standard components, but that is not exactly a great solution. And additional thing is always done in the projects. So let's consider you implement finance and operations. You're gonna build your security roles, maybe even based on standard components. And then, as always, somebody comes and say, oh no, they cannot see this field, or they cannot see that specific value, or they should be selecting only 2 options instead of 100, which is available. So like a cherry on the top, limitations, exceptions. For that, we have something called code permissions. What is this exactly? That's kind of a parameter you can apply on the top of the field. So potentially, if you're gonna tell to the sales, all right, only manager should see like a final margin, they are able to apply code permission, and that exception will travel only to the sales manager role. So only sales manager will be capable of seeing that specific value. If somebody needs to see only financial dimensions or bank account details, you can make those exceptions. And all of these are code permissions. Good to know. This is actually a duty for developers. They apply that and they are helping you build the roles which will contain that code permission. What about the licensing? In finance and operations, we had that stage where everything was an enterprise license, we had team member and activity, it was pretty simplified model. But last year, system changed. No anymore simple operational model. It is now basic. And the basic means that you have basic finance, basic project, basic HR, and several others. You have attachments, and you have team member and activity. That whole component, so-called basic model license, this year, in 2024, will be extended to basic premium. So it gets even more complicated. But if you're gonna focus a bit on that, it is actually something which can understand pretty easily. It simply says that there are different areas in the system, areas like sales, purchasing, SCM, HR, projects. So if you have very high valuable functionality from that area, it's going to be understood as the basic, so the expensive license, and the area defines what is the name, like the postfix. So basic project, basic HR, basic SCM. If you're going to have a user with 100 object access, 100 forms, buttons, and so forth, and majority of them will come from SCM, supply chain management. It will say that the actual license for the user will be basic SCM. So that is the price you pay for that. But in case that they're gonna have in the same moment project, HR access, at least one element, then we have to pay extra for attachment. So we're gonna have basic SCM plus HR plus projects. And that sums up to the value you pay monthly for the user. If you're gonna understand that concept, you'll notice that it is actually important, once again, to focus on entry points and deliver as less as possible to make sure that your user has optimized user experience and interface, but also they are costing less when it comes to monthly payment. Let's see what standard does when it comes to standard reporting. So let's switch to finance and operations. As I was mentioning, in system administration, that's your major sandbox. This is where you do roles, where you do configurations, and you work with reports. The reports are to be used for licensing currently. It's the user license estimator plus user license counts. Then you are able to count how many users are needing several licenses, and when it comes to attachments, also understand what kind of attachment is needed for a specific user. We will not focus on that too much today. I would love to show you the first thing, which is users, and that is an element which outlines everybody who has access in finance and operations. So we have an example of April, the email address, and the account is enabled. If you're going to go inside, you're going to see multiple roles which are allocated against the user. Finance and operations is a extremely comprehensive ERP system for big organizations. Big organizations, they're going to have multiple entities. So since even on this Contoso, we have USMF, GBSI, THMF, and so forth, this actually gives you the possibility to allocate a role against the organization. So I can be sales in one entity and purchase in another one. That parameterization is actually here, so I'm able to assign organization into the role to make a selective decision where I'm actually doing a specific role in the organization, in which one I'm playing what role. So you can grant to all organizations, all grant access specifically, individually for the GBSI, USRT, and USMF. That's your options. If you're going to disable the account, so this radio button will be deactivated, the switch box will be deactivated, this user will be not able to log into finance and operations. So that's the cockpit for allocations. And let's focus on the role itself. There is another interesting place for security configurations. In here, you are able to see all roles created in finance and operations, and I'm able to dive in from AP manager role into the references, which are duties or privileges or tables. So I can see how many different duties are allocated. I can see that that simple one row has tens of duties. Each of those duties, they have privileges, and each of privilege will have potentially either table access or entry points. So action menu items, display menu items, output menu items. This might confuse you, but let me give you a quick explanation for this. So entry points, they have three types: action, display, and output. They are actually referring outputs. Normally, these are reports. Display is going to be more like forms, and actions are referring to buttons. So you have to make sure that this will, you will know that those principles, because when you're going to search access for a specific intention, specific like button, you will need to focus only on action menu items. It actually depends how development is done, so sometimes you can get confused. That's why the security is pretty complicated in finance and operations, but since it's very selective, it gives you super broad multiple options to choose from. It simply takes it to the higher level of complexity, higher level of, you need to have much more time to learn about that. When it comes to other privileges, let's take something which will have some entry points to show you. Let's do maintain vendor invoices. It's going to be pretty big. Privileges, change view split postings. So now you see that role had multiple duties. Duty had multiple privileges. And finally, the privilege consists multiple display menu items. So we have 2 allocated for 1 privilege. Number of combination is significant, but also this gives you that bad feeling for auditors, which will need to focus and set some level for segregation of duty. We're gonna have a separate classes for segregation of duties, but that is something which makes a headache due to complexity of finance and operations securities. Aside of the entry point access, because I can have access to entry point, which gives me access to sales form, but I can have access to read data only, or I can have access to create data only, or to delete data. So that's another level, and we are going pretty deep. You are able to add to your user specifically access to only read data. And that actually might mean that read access to specific form will cost less than maintain access. By maintain, I mean create, delete, or correct. This is how low it gets when it comes to license calculation. But this also gives you great capabilities to tailor the roles exactly to the process and pay for the system in the exact way how you use it. That's why it is important to focus on the entry points and build your roles with some understanding how big will be the impact. So security configuration, all the changes you're going to perform, because typically you're going to modify those roles or build yours. All modification, if I'm going to grant here some display menu items access rights, then they go to the publishing. Finance and operations has that great feature which keeps your standard role package as a code in AOT, and on the top you can build your customizations, which are staying in the tables, and they are not having direct impact on the physical code in AOT unless you're going to move that to the AOT. So all the configuration changes which you do in finance and operations and security configuration module will stay in it until you're going to say, I'm fine with the changes and I think I'll be able to make it official. So then you collaborate with developers. You can then move the code to AOT and make it permanent. That is potential way how you would do finalization of the role. If the users like the way how they work, they like the cost aspect of the role, and then we can make it official. So this and previously in previous slides, I was telling a bit about how to find entry points. Let's do that now. I'll navigate towards the security functionality on the sales form, and in the all sales orders, whenever we have a situation like I want to identify what is behind the open transactions, right click, form name, and here you might see some information about the objects: sales table, list page, menu item type, display. So it gives me the feeling what I actually need to have access in here. Unfortunately, it is not so accurate, so standard might mislead you here because the option that we selected is actually an open trans. So we can try to find out if this control gives you more information, but If there is no clue, then again, you might need to search for extra tools, like this one, which gives you idea that this is cast open trans action. So this element needs to be added in order to get access to the specific functionality that I clicked. But again, if you don't have extensions like this, you might work with developers so they can find that from the form perspective. So simply saying they can go to AOT, find the form, and find what is behind the button. To save time, we use extensions like this. In case that you're gonna say, all right, but I don't want to create a role. I want to find out what role gives me access to this specific place. I can use security diagnostics, which will find out what role, what privilege, what duty gives me access to the place where I just went. So I can go to the bottom, find out that view sales orders will give me access to that specific right place. So when I'm building the role and I'm trying to use some existing objects, existing security components in finance and operations, that might be a way to go. So I can try to understand business, and they will say, I do this transaction, this and this on that form. So I go with them, and then I find the smallest privilege, which is in those specific sections. I'm building that into the duty, build the role, and deploy for them for user acceptance testing. That might be some specific kind of a cutting corners way how to create a role using standardized objects with the best possible preciseness level when it comes to those big chunks coming from APQC library. That will be it for one-on-one classes for security in finance and operations. I will be more than happy to walk you through more details, maybe a step down on the ladder to get more understanding, more complexity. We're gonna have more sessions dedicated for code permissions, more sessions for compliance. So stay tuned and get in contact with us. Details are here on our slide. Thank you so much for your attention and stay tuned.